Welcome to Modern Crime Scope, where we uncover the darkest true crime stories, mysterious investigations, and shocking cases from around the world, told with detail, suspense, and respect for the victims. Emily Hayes was a young pregnant woman with her whole future ahead of her, but when Iowa police discovered her lifeless body staged inside a shopping cart, the shocking case unraveled into a dark web of obsession, jealousy, and betrayal, leading investigators straight to her ex-boyfriend Mark and her coworker Aaron, two men whose disturbing secrets would leave an entire community shaken. The morning began like any other in Des Moines, quiet and gray, the air heavy with a chill that made the streets seem emptier than usual. A call came through to the police dispatch, a voice shaky and uncertain describing something unusual in an abandoned parking lot behind a grocery store that had shut down months earlier. The caller was a homeless man who often took shelter near the loading dock. He said there was a shopping cart sitting oddly in the middle of the lot, and something about it didn't feel right. The first responding officers arrived, not expecting much beyond discarded junk or abandoned belongings. But the moment their headlights cut across the lot, the shape inside the cart froze them in their tracks. The cart was rusted, its wheels bent from years of use, but the contents were unmistakable. Wrapped in a thin, faded blanket was the body of a young woman. Her face was pale and lifeless, her arms carefully folded across her stomach, as if someone had posed her that way. The most haunting detail was the clear evidence of pregnancy, the curve of her stomach showing through the fabric, a life within a life that had also been cut short. The silence of the lot seemed to press down harder, the officers realizing instantly that this was no accident, no overdose, no natural death. This was murder. The scene was taped off within minutes, red and blue lights flickering against the cracked pavement and boarded-up store windows. Investigators arrived, surveying the cart as though it was a crime scene deliberately crafted to send a message. There were no shoes on her feet, though the marks on her ankles suggested she had been wearing them not long before. Around her neck hung a delicate gold chain, tarnished but still intact, as though it had been placed back on her after death. These small details told detectives that the killer had not simply abandoned the body, but had staged it. Forensic technicians carefully documented every angle, snapping photographs, marking the cart, and dusting for prints. But the cold reality settled in quickly. Whoever had done this had been meticulous. The blanket covering the woman looked almost freshly laundered, strangely clean for the grim context. The way her arms had been crossed, her head tilted slightly to the side, and the absence of blood or visible struggle all hinted that the killer had taken their time. This wasn't a rushed dumping of a victim. This was someone who wanted her to be found, and found in this way. The officers whispered among themselves, shaken by the quiet brutality of what they were seeing. It wasn't only the fact that a woman had been murdered, but that she had been carrying a child. The symbolism of the shopping cart gnawed at them. It was something used every day, an object so ordinary, now transformed into a coffin on wheels. To them, it looked like she had been reduced to nothing more than an item abandoned in a lot where no one cared to look. By the time the body was removed and sent for autopsy, the story was already spreading through police channels, reporters circling the scene like vultures. Questions began to flood the minds of investigators. Who was she? Who had wanted her dead? And why leave her in such a haunting display? The answers were far away, but one thing was certain. The quiet streets of Des Moines had just been shaken awake by a mystery that would reveal darkness far deeper than anyone could imagine. The victim was quickly identified after the autopsy team released early findings. Her name was Emily Hayes, a 24-year-old waitress who lived only a few miles away from the parking lot where her body had been found. Emily was 6 months pregnant, and her family had reported her missing just 2 days before the grisly discovery. The news devastated those who knew her, and detectives understood that solving her case would be as much about uncovering the truth of her last moments as it was about finding justice for her unborn child. Investigators retraced her final hours, starting with the night she disappeared. Emily had worked a closing shift at the small diner where she was employed. Her coworkers remembered her leaving at midnight, tired but cheerful, carrying her apron tucked into her bag as she waved goodbye. Her car was parked in a dark section of the lot behind the diner, an area with only one flickering street lamp. Hours later, that same car was found untouched. Inside were her keys, her purse, and even the phone she always carried. To detectives, this raised an alarming question. If Emily hadn't left in her car, how had she vanished? The diner's security cameras offered a partial answer. Grainy footage showed Emily walking alone across the lot, her figure swallowed by the shadows near the farthest corner. There was no sign of anyone else, but her sudden disappearance from the frame was deeply unsettling. She had not walked past the cameras again, nor had anyone seen her leave the property. It was as if she had been pulled into the darkness and erased. Detectives suspected someone had been waiting for her just beyond the reach of the lens, someone who knew the cameras wouldn't catch what happened next. The investigation turned toward Emily's personal life. Interviews with family and friends painted the picture of a young woman trying to rebuild herself after a rocky breakup with her longtime boyfriend, Mark. The pregnancy complicated things, and although she had not publicly revealed the father's identity, whispers suggested it might have been Mark despite their separation. He denied involvement in her disappearance, claiming he hadn't spoken to her in weeks, but detectives noted the tension in his words and filed his name for closer scrutiny. Meanwhile, those who worked alongside Emily described her as kind and hard-working, but also someone who had drawn unwanted attention. One coworker recalled how a quiet busboy named Aaron often offered to walk her to her car, even when she declined. His fixation seemed odd at the time, but no one had thought it dangerous until now. The revelation gave police two early suspects, each with motive and opportunity. As the days passed, the public became more restless, demanding answers. Vigils were held, candles lit for Emily and her unborn child. The image of her abandoned in a shopping cart spread quickly through the news, creating outrage and fear. People in Des Moines locked their doors earlier, avoided walking alone at night, and spoke in hushed voices about the kind of person capable of committing such a calculated act. For detectives, the pressure mounted. Emily's murder was no longer just a case. It had become a chilling reminder that someone in their city was watching, waiting, and willing to strike again. The autopsy findings revealed details that pushed the investigation into darker territory. Emily had been strangled, her neck showing faint bruising beneath the skin where pressure had been applied. The medical examiner concluded she had been killed quickly but not impulsively. The bruises and the lack of defensive wounds suggested she had been overpowered before she could fight back. What unsettled investigators most was how carefully her body had been handled afterward. Her skin and nails were unusually clean for someone who had likely struggled before death, and her clothing bore no trace of soil, blood, or fibers that might connect her to a location. It was as if the killer had taken great care to wash her, dress her again, and place her in the cart like a grim exhibit. The positioning of her body raised chilling questions. She had been laid with her arms folded across her stomach, her head slightly tilted to the side, and the thin blanket drawn over her in a manner resembling a burial shroud. The arrangement suggested control and symbolism rather than panic. The shopping cart itself became an object of fascination among investigators. It was battered and rusted, but its wheels bore smudges of fresh dirt, suggesting it had been pushed recently. The parking lot where Emily was discovered was not near her home, her workplace, or anywhere she might have gone on her own. Someone had deliberately chosen that desolate space, rolled her body into the open, and left it there to be found. Psychological profilers brought into the case argued that the killer wanted attention. Leaving the body in such a public yet eerie way was not only about disposing of a victim, it was about crafting a statement. The cart, an everyday object tied to routine and necessity, had been transformed into something horrifying, forcing the public to see Emily as discarded property. Detectives began considering whether this could be the work of someone with an obsession, someone who needed to feel control over how Emily was remembered. Attention turned once again to her personal circle. Emily's estranged boyfriend, Mark, had a history of jealousy and controlling behavior, but the idea that he could carefully stage her body seemed out of character for his known impulsiveness. On the other hand, her coworker Aaron, the quiet busboy, showed traits that unsettled investigators. His past included a reprimand for following another woman after work, and the eerie neatness of Emily's body seemed to align with someone who was methodical, perhaps even ritualistic. Still, nothing concrete tied either man to the crime yet. Detectives combed through Emily's apartment for clues. They found her journals, notes about her struggles with independence, and vague references to someone she had been afraid of. No names were mentioned, but one entry written weeks before her death described feeling followed after late shifts. Another passage mentioned how she feared her pregnancy was making her a target, though she never explained why. These haunting words gave investigators a glimpse into Emily's mind, hinting that she may have sensed danger long before it claimed her. The case was no longer just about who killed her, but about why someone would go to such lengths to stage her death. Every detail, from the missing shoes to the carefully folded arms, suggested a killer who wanted to leave behind a message. The problem was, no one could yet decipher what that message meant, or how many more secrets were buried in the shadows of Emily's final days. Detectives shifted their focus to the two men who stood out most in Emily's life: her ex-boyfriend Mark and her co-worker Aaron. Both had histories that raised suspicion, and both had potential motives. Mark had been deeply entangled in Emily's past, their breakup filled with heated arguments that neighbors recalled overhearing. He had always been controlling, and the news of her pregnancy had complicated everything. Some believed the child was his, and if that were true, the possibility of him being involved in her death seemed even stronger. Investigators began to piece together his movements, examining phone records, financial transactions, and interviews with those close to him. What they found painted a troubling picture. Mark had been near the diner on the night Emily vanished, though he denied it when questioned. While suspicion around Mark grew, Aaron's profile became just as disturbing. He was quiet, unassuming, the type of man who blended into the background at work, but his coworkers remembered details that seemed unsettling now. He lingered too long after shifts, watched the women at the diner more closely than he should, and seemed especially drawn to Emily. When police visited his small apartment, what they uncovered disturbed even the most seasoned investigators. Inside his closet was a box filled with women's personal belongings: scarves, bracelets, hair clips, items that clearly did not belong to him. Among them was a pair of women's shoes, the same size and style Emily had been known to wear, but which were missing when her body was found. The discovery immediately tied Aaron to the crime in the minds of many. His strange collection of women's things hinted at an obsession, possibly trophies taken to relive encounters. More disturbing was the presence of empty pregnancy test boxes, hidden in the same container, as though he had an unhealthy fixation on women who were expecting. To the detectives, this detail changed everything. It suggested that Emily's pregnancy may not have been just incidental, but central to the reason she was targeted. Still, the evidence was not yet definitive. The fibers from Emily's blanket did not match anything in Aaron's home, and investigators knew they had to be cautious before drawing conclusions. They began to wonder if Aaron had acted alone or if someone else was involved. The neat staging of Emily's body, the clean blanket, and the deliberate placement of the cart all suggested planning that went beyond a single impulsive act. It felt orchestrated, as though more than one set of hands had been responsible for carrying out the crime. Community tension deepened as the media reported on the disturbing discoveries. The idea that Emily's death might not have been the work of a lone predator, but potentially a conspiracy between men in her life, horrified the public. Detectives pressed forward, knowing they were on the brink of something bigger. Each lead seemed to unravel into more questions, each suspect carrying pieces of the truth, but never the full picture. The puzzle was growing more twisted, and the realization dawned that Emily S.'s tragic end might have been the result of not just one obsession, but two working in sinister harmony. As detectives closed in on their suspects, the investigation took a sudden turn when forensic results returned from the state crime lab. Fibers collected from the blanket wrapped around Emily were traced back to carpet samples that matched the interior of Mark S.'s apartment. The discovery placed Emily in his home on the night of her disappearance, shattering his alibi. The revelation raised an unsettling possibility. While Aaron Ah's strange collection of women Ah's belongings had tied him to the crime in a symbolic way, the physical evidence now tied Mark directly to Emily's final hours. Detectives began to consider that the two men might not only have known about each other, but may have acted together. The scenario grew clearer as investigators reconstructed the timeline. Emily had likely been forced into Mark's vehicle outside the diner, her car left behind as a chilling clue. She may have been taken to his apartment where the fatal attack occurred, but the staging of her body was too calculated, too deliberate to be Mark's alone. His history suggested rage and jealousy, not patience or ritual. That was where Aaron fit. His obsession, his habit of collecting women's items, and his disturbing fixation on pregnancy revealed a mind that thrived on control and display. It was possible that Mark committed the killing in a burst of emotion, and Aaron later transformed Emily into the haunting scene found in the shopping cart. Detectives searched further, uncovering messages exchanged between the two men months before Emily's death. What seemed like casual conversations about work and mutual acquaintances took on a darker tone under closer scrutiny. Buried within the texts were comments about Emily, vague hints of frustration, jealousy, and obsession. The connection between the men, once thought weak, was now undeniable. They had both circled her life in different ways, one as a bitter former lover, the other as a quiet stalker in plain sight. Together, their obsessions had collided with tragic consequences. The arrests came swiftly. Mark was taken into custody first, his anger boiling over as he was led away in handcuffs. Aaron was arrested hours later, his calm demeanor chilling to officers who had expected resistance. In separate interrogation rooms, both men denied involvement, each trying to shift blame onto the other. But the combined weight of forensic evidence, witness statements, and their disturbing personal histories left little room for doubt. The case painted a picture of two predators who had found common ground in their fixation on a single woman, a fixation that had ended with her staged death in a forgotten parking lot. When the details were finally revealed in court, the community was shaken to its core. The horrifying truth was that Emily S.'s murder was not the work of a faceless stranger, but of two men she had once trusted to varying degrees. The shopping cart, once just a symbol of everyday life, now became the unforgettable image of her tragic fate. For her family, justice brought some measure of closure, but no verdict could undo the loss of Emily and her unborn child. Her story became a reminder of how obsession can twist into violence and how sometimes the darkest conspiracies hide in the most ordinary corners of life.